What happens when one of country music's most beloved icons walks into what she thinks is a friendly late-night interview, only to find herself facing a host who seems determined to tear her down? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history, when Dolly Parton found herself in an unexpected battle of wits that would leave everyone stunned. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think really happened here. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of this confrontation. The night started like any other taping at the studio. Dolly had arrived early, as she always does, dressed in one of her signature sparkling outfits, her blonde hair perfectly styled, radiating that warm energy that has made her a beloved figure for decades. She had been booked on the show to promote her latest philanthropic venture, a literacy program that was close to her heart. The producers had assured her team that it would be a light, fun interview, the kind she had done hundreds of times before, but something was different from the moment she walked onto that set. The usual warmth that greets A-list celebrities was noticeably absent. The host barely looked up from his notes when she entered, offering only a brief nod of acknowledgement. The production assistants seemed unusually tense, whispering among themselves and avoiding eye contact with the country legend. As Dolly settled into the guest chair, she tried to break the ice with her characteristic charm. She complimented the set, asked about the host's family, and shared a funny story about her drive to the studio. But instead of the usual banter and laughter that typically fills these pre-show moments, she was met with cold professionalism and barely concealed irritation. The host finally looked up from his cards, and Dolly could see something in his eyes that she had rarely encountered in her decades in the entertainment industry: genuine hostility. It was as if he had already decided that this interview was going to be a confrontation rather than a conversation. The audience could sense the tension too, their usual excited chatter dying down to uncomfortable murmurs. When the cameras started rolling, the host's demeanor shifted into what could only be described as barely contained aggression. His opening questions, which should have been softball queries about her new charity work, instead came loaded with skepticism and barely veiled accusations. He questioned her motives, suggested her philanthropy was merely a tax write-off, and implied that her down-home image was nothing but a carefully constructed facade. Dolly, ever the professional, tried to steer the conversation back to positive territory. She spoke passionately about the children who would benefit from her literacy program, sharing heartwarming stories about kids learning to read for the first time. But the host seemed determined to find fault with everything she said, interrupting her mid-sentence to challenge her statistics, questioning her funding sources, and treating her genuine emotion as if it were a performance. The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted entertainment they had come to see. They were watching what felt like an interrogation, with one of America's sweethearts being treated like a criminal defendant. Some audience members started to boo softly, but the host seemed to take this as encouragement rather than criticism. As the first segment continued, the host's questions became increasingly personal and invasive. He brought up old tabloid rumors that had been debunked years ago, questioned her marriage, and even had the audacity to suggest that her famous figure was the only reason for her success. Each attack was delivered with a smug smile, as if he believed he was exposing some great truth that others had been too polite to address. Dolly maintained her composure with remarkable grace, deflecting each barb with humor and dignity. But those who knew her well could see the fire beginning to build behind her eyes. She had spent decades dealing with critics and skeptics, but this level of outright disrespect was something entirely different. The host wasn't just asking tough questions, he was actively trying to humiliate her on national television. The breaking point came when the host made a snide comment about her Appalachian roots, using a tone that suggested anyone from that region was inherently less intelligent or sophisticated. It was a moment that crossed the line from aggressive journalism into personal attack, and everyone in the studio could feel the atmosphere change. Dolly's smile remained fixed, but her voice took on a steel edge that hadn't been there before. What happened next would become the stuff of television legend, setting up a confrontation that no one in that studio would ever forget. The steel in Dolly's voice was unmistakable as she leaned forward in her chair, her famous smile never wavering but her eyes growing cold as winter mountain air. "Well, honey," she said, her southern drawl becoming more pronounced, "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, and I've heard every insult, every joke, and every snide remark you could possibly imagine. But what I haven't heard is a single intelligent question from you tonight." The audience erupted in applause, but the host wasn't backing down. If anything, her response seemed to fuel his determination to break her down. "Oh, so now we're going to pretend that asking real questions is insulting?" he shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you're just not used to journalists who aren't willing to kiss your rhinestone-covered ring." The camera captured every micro-expression on Dolly's face as she processed what he had just said. For a split second, the mask of professional courtesy slipped, revealing a flash of genuine anger that few people had ever seen from the usually unflappable entertainer. But instead of exploding, she did something far more devastating. She got deadly calm. "Sugar," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been interviewed by Mike Wallace, Barbara Walters, and Oprah Winfrey. Real journalists who know how to ask tough questions with respect and intelligence. What you're doing isn't journalism, it's just plain old-fashioned meanness dressed up in a cheap suit." The host's face flushed red, and his composure began to crack. "Maybe you're just not smart enough to understand the difference between tough questions and softballs," he snapped. "Your fans might eat up this folksy act, but some of us can see right through it." That was the moment everyone knew this interview had gone beyond salvageable. Dolly stood up slowly, her 5-foot frame somehow commanding the entire studio's attention. "You know what, darling," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent audience. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. I've been called dumb, I've been called fake, I've been called worse things than that, but I've never been called those things by someone who clearly doesn't have the first clue about what real class looks like." The host leaned back in his chair, perhaps finally realizing he had pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Dolly looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home rather than the man who had been attacking her. "It means that when you invite someone into your home, which is what a television studio is supposed to be, you treat them with basic human decency. You don't ambush them with personal attacks disguised as questions. You don't mock their background or their beliefs. And you certainly don't mistake cruelty for cleverness." The audience was on their feet now, applauding thunderously. Even the production crew, who were supposed to remain neutral, could be seen nodding in agreement. The host looked around desperately, realizing that he had lost control of his own show, but instead of gracefully backing down, he doubled down on his aggression. "So you're just going to lecture me about how to do my job?" he asked, his voice rising. "This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want to ask. If you can't handle real journalism, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on." Dolly's laugh was like music, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, honey, this isn't journalism. This is a grown man having a tantrum on television because he thought he could bully someone, and it didn't work out the way he planned. I've seen toddlers with better manners than what you've shown tonight." The host's mask finally slipped completely. "You know what? You're right. This is my show, and I don't have to sit here and listen to some over-the-hill country singer tell me how to do my job. If you don't like my questions, you can leave." The studio fell completely silent. Everyone understood that this was the point of no return. Dolly had been given an ultimatum, and whatever she chose to do next would define how this night would be remembered. The cameras captured every second as she considered her options, her expressions cycling through disappointment, sadness, and finally resolve. "You know what, sweetheart," she said, beginning to remove her microphone. "I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. I came here tonight to talk about helping children learn to read, to share something positive and meaningful with your audience. But instead, I've been subjected to the kind of behavior that would make my grandmother wash your mouth out with soap." The host, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of his mistake, tried to backtrack. "Now wait a minute, let's not be hasty here. We can reset, start over, ask different questions." But Dolly was already standing, her microphone pack being removed by a production assistant who looked mortified by the entire situation. "Oh no, honey," she said, shaking her head. "You showed your true colors tonight, and they're not pretty. I don't need to subject myself to this kind of treatment. And your audience deserves better than watching you tear people down for your own amusement." What came next would shock everyone in that studio and create a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media and news programs worldwide. As Dolly prepared to leave, the host made one final catastrophic mistake. Perhaps driven by desperation to salvage his show, or maybe just unable to let her have the last word, he called out after her, "You know what, Dolly? This is exactly why country music is dying. It's all fake emotion and manufactured drama from people who peaked 30 years ago." The entire studio gasped. Even the cameras seemed to shake as the operators realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Dolly stopped dead in her tracks, her back still to the host. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody made a sound. When she finally turned around, her expression was unlike anything anyone had ever seen from the woman known for her perpetual positivity. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying across the silent studio like a whip crack. The host, apparently not realizing he had just stepped off a cliff, continued his attack. "You heard me? Country music used to mean something. Now it's just costume jewelry and fake sentiment from people trading on old glory." What happened next would become one of the most quoted moments in entertainment history. Dolly walked back toward the host's desk, her heels clicking on the studio floor like a countdown timer. When she reached his desk, she placed both hands on it and leaned forward, bringing herself eye-level with the man who had spent the entire evening trying to tear her down. "Let me tell you something, mister," she said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the studio. "I have sold over 100 million albums worldwide. I have written over 3,000 songs, including classics that will be played long after you're forgotten. I have employed thousands of people, donated millions of dollars to charity, and brought joy to generations of families. I have built theme parks, started scholarship programs, and helped save countless lives through my music and my message." The host tried to interrupt, but Dolly held up one perfectly manicured finger that silenced him instantly. "I am not finished," she continued. "You sit behind this desk every night and think that being cruel makes you clever, that tearing people down makes you important. But let me tell you what you really are. You are a small, bitter man who mistakes meanness for wit and cruelty for courage. You have used your platform tonight not to inform or entertain, but to try to humiliate someone who has done nothing but try to make the world a better place." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the production crew had stopped what they were doing to listen. The host's face had gone from red to pale, and for the first time all evening, he seemed to understand the gravity of what he had unleashed. "And another thing," Dolly continued, her voice rising slightly, "you want to talk about fake? Let's talk about a man who puts on a smile every night and pretends to be entertaining while spending his time looking for ways to hurt people. Let's talk about someone who hides behind jokes and clever editing to mask the fact that he has nothing meaningful to contribute to the world. Let's talk about a person so insecure in his own abilities that the only way he can feel important is by trying to make others feel small." The host opened his mouth to respond, but Dolly wasn't done. "I have been in show business for over 50 years, and I have met every kind of person you can imagine. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. but I have rarely encountered someone with as little grace, as little kindness, and as little understanding of what it means to be a decent human being as what I've witnessed from you tonight." She straightened up, towering over him despite her small stature. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact, something you lost about 20 minutes ago. I'm going to continue doing what I've always done, which is spreading joy and helping people. And you're going to sit here and think about whether this is really the legacy you want to leave." The host, finally finding his voice, stammered, "This is live television. You can't just walk out on my show." Dolly's smile returned, but it was different now, sharper, more dangerous. "Honey, I can do whatever I want. That's the beautiful thing about being successful, talented, and respected. I don't need your show, your approval, or your platform. But apparently you needed me, or you wouldn't have invited me here in the first place." She began walking toward the exit again, but this time she paused to address the audience directly. "I want to thank all of you lovely people for being here tonight. You deserved so much better than what you witnessed, and I'm sorry you had to see someone be treated this way. But I hope you remember that no matter who you are or where you come from, you should never let anyone make you feel small or unworthy. Stand up for yourselves, stand up for others, and always choose kindness over cruelty." The audience erupted, in the longest, loudest standing ovation in the show's history. People were cheering, crying, and shouting words of support. The host sat frozen at his desk, realizing that his own audience had completely turned against him. As Dolly reached the stage exit, she turned one final time to face the host. "And one more thing, darling," she called out over the thunderous applause. "Country music isn't dying, but your career just might be." With that, she disappeared behind the curtain, leaving behind a studio in chaos, an audience on their feet, and a host who had just learned the hard way that some people are beloved for very good reasons. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath, as the most gracious woman in entertainment made it clear that grace has its limits, and when those limits are crossed, the reckoning can be swift and absolute. That's the story of the night. Dolly Parton showed the world that you can be kind, you can be gracious, and you can be forgiving, but you should never let anyone mistake those qualities for weakness. What did you think of Dolly's response? Was she right to walk out, or should she have stayed and tried to salvage the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of entertainment.